Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Back again. I can see there's sweat on the brow of Sam Smith. He's working very hard. Somebody has noted that he has a lovely blouse on. I don't know if I call it a blouse, it's more of a shirt, but looks very good indeed. I don't know how we're going to go here, but let's just try it. We can, Sam. Thank goodness for that.
Finally, thank you for that. It is not a blouse. It is a designer shirt, sir.
I know.
Thank you for your kind words.
I know, but someone on chat said, "What a nice blouse, little Miss L." It is not a blouse; it's a shirt, and very
It is a
nice.
man's shirt from a man's store.
Yeah, exactly. You give it to him, baby. Tell us about the your experience with the. Again, it sounds like a bunch of cows. The Hertfordshire Police. Hello, when they seized your electronic devices, you were wrongly arrested. Home searched, a whole kit and caboodle. They didn't leave anything to your imagination.
So, yeah, I'm a legally qualified UK law blogger, and about 1:45 one day in March, I was in bed and there was a knock on the door and the police. And there was a lot of police. You know, this wasn't just one or two police. This was a couple of vehicles. There's a van, there's cars. I put in various sort of correspondence 12 police and they haven't denied it. And so I was very polite to them. I invited them in and I said, you know, what's this about? And they said, oh, we're arresting you for sending 2 false communications, which is 2 blog articles I'd written. And bear in mind, I just got out of bed and put on a dressing gown. So, you know, I wasn't in any particular state to kind of consider this. And I said, have you read these articles? Because most of my articles link to citations. I don't just sort of make stuff up. If I say someone said something, there'll be a screenshot or a link to a source, you know, a reputable newspaper. And they said, well, you've written these false statements about 2 local men, a gentleman called Marcus Carpenter and a local builder called Ryan Reynolds, who has the same name as the actor. And they arrested me. And then on the basis of that, they did what's called a warrantless search under Section 32 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. And they seized all my devices, which included my phone, my laptop, and my desktop PC. And so we went to the police station and I was there for several hours and eventually I was interviewed and we got to the bottom of what they thought was false. And the reason it came apart and what perhaps was most concerning is some of the things they said were false weren't in the articles at all. I hadn't written them, they weren't in the article. So I was supposed to have said that Marcus Carpenter was violent, and I simply had never written that. I'd also referred to a person who had a conviction. Now, that's spent, but in the UK there are exceptions to our kind of rehabilitation laws, and the fact that a conviction's spent doesn't mean you can't write about it. So there's protections for free speech. But I'd said this person had a drugs conviction. And I'd linked to the local newspaper, which is a very worthy local newspaper, which had, you know, been in the court and, you know, had confirmed he was convicted. And of course, that allegation I made was simply true. So my defense to police was, look, some of these allegations, you know, your uniforms have put in this interview, no, like I didn't make, and the others are true. And they're screenshotted. They're right there. And then, you know, eventually, I mean, there were some other things. I mean, the people I'd written about were quite inflammatory and they made threats of violence and someone had retaliated against them. So police were asking about all these things that these people had brought on themselves, really. And so I then, you know, eventually got released on bail. I went home and I'm legally qualified. I actually do, as a Mackenzie friend, a lot of lawsuits against police. So I went and looked all this up when I had sort of the luxury of doing a Google search on a family member's computer. And it turned out the new Online Safety Act, one of the very few good things you can say about it, is they've downgraded the offence of sending a false communication. It used to be under a different law called the Malicious Communications Act, but that was repealed. And they've downgraded it to the UK equivalent of a misdemeanour. And if you're arrested for that UK equivalent of a misdemeanour, what's called a summary-only offence, it's not lawful for them to then do a warrantless search. So I put in this complaint saying, you know, actually, you can't have lawfully done a search of my home because under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, section 32 2B, you need to have arrested me for a serious offence, an indictable offence, like a felony. So that search was unlawful. Also, because I help people and give legal advice, I've got legal advice from myself as a Mackenzie friend and legal advice from barristers and people on my computers. So there's a whole bunch of privileged material on there which police are never allowed to seize. And obviously also there's things people have said to me in confidence which isn't protected under a warrantless search but would ordinarily be protected under, for example, a search warrant because of journalistic privilege. So I put all this in, and I put in a police complaint, which is combined with what's called a letter of claim, which is the process to start a lawsuit here. Because I'm legally qualified, it's not that hard for me to represent myself in court, because I do a lot of helping other people. And within a week, the detectives, who incidentally are in no way to blame for this, they just kind of picked it up off uniform, just closed the investigation down and said, well, on the evidentiary basis, this isn't going anywhere, and gave me all my stuff back, which was jolly nice. Because usually it can take months for people. But what really concerns me is there's a lot of other laws they've broken, because even though the UK has got ridiculously, in some ways, oppressive towards free speech, there are free speech protection laws here. And there's a lot of case law that, you have to be proportionate, particularly when you're dealing with an alleged non-violent offence. We're not saying that I've burned someone's house down. We're saying I've made some factual errors in an article. And there's case law saying, they really shouldn't be arresting you for this. They should be inviting you for a voluntary interview.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, the police complaints procedure starts to chug on. And by that stage, because I've got the great privilege that I am legally qualified, the only defendants really are the police officers involved, which isn't perhaps what they had intended at the outset. And the complaint handling was a shambles, because the complaint handler in his report just ignored the bits he didn't like. So when I put, for example, some of my supposedly false allegations weren't even in these articles, they just didn't deal with that. They didn't deal with my concerns about breach of the UK Human Rights Act, and they said that I was arrested under the Malicious Communications Act, which was the previous law, which has been repealed in that respect as to false communications, and replaced with the Online Safety Act. And so they have now put it into a review process, which is going to take a while. But they have been so unhelpful and so arrogant that what I have been talking to counsel about, and I've got some very helpful barristers who are looking at this for me, is just bringing the claim anyway, because, they are in fact notorious for, when they've messed up, for being very slow and very unfriendly and helpful about sorting things out. And in fact, there's a great UK solicitor called Ian Gould, who's really great at suing the police, who has a whole category of Hertfordshire police sort of messing around when they have messed up. And that's on free speech issues, but also terrible things like there was a man who'd been a bit late updating his benefits details. So the way police dealt with it was they chased his car, they smashed all the car windows, they sprayed him with mace, they pulled him out, this was Hertfordshire police again, they smashed his shin with a baton, leaving him crippled for life. And this was all on body cam. And then this solicitor helped his client sue, and eventually they won. They got 100 grand. And despite there being CCTV, police appealed. It's like, there's video of this. And of course, it didn't make any difference. And eventually they paid up. And the police officer responsible for that was later convicted of sexual misconduct. So the fact that the police kind of didn't deal with the disciplinary about smashing some guy's car up on his shin, they actually left a predator on the force. And Ingould's got some great articles about that. And obviously he's one of Britain's top solicitors. So Hertfordshire has form for, recklessly defending cut and dried cases for years. And it's very, very, very true.
It's interesting because, first of all, there are 2 complaints. 2. We're not talking about hundreds or what, 2 complaints.
Yes.
Then we have the police popping around at quarter to midnight. Of course, you'd be asleep or almost asleep if not. anybody else was going through that, they would have soiled their pants because you have a background in law, you know how to handle yourself. But could you imagine just a normal person being woken up at 12 at night? I'm sure it wasn't a light tap on the door. I mean, it would have been terrifying. Why were they trying to stitch you up? Because they were. A policeman or policewoman, when they become a police person, they promise and swear to uphold the law. If they've included false information in that, one, they've committed perjury, and secondly, what they've done is they've committed a crime. But they've tried to stitch you up. Why would they want to stitch you up?
So, although it's not a major feature, I have been slightly critical of police. And in fact, one of the two articles did, not very hard, criticise the local police commander, Chief Inspector Pete Frost, slightly. And, it is difficult to see why else it would be proportionate to send an entire intervention team around my house. I mean, I haven't got a very clear understanding of how this was authorised, because the complaint report tries to put it all on one police constable or two police constables. And although I'm not best pleased with them, I'm not stupid. A lowly police constable can't authorise, 6 to 12 police officers and 2 vans. Clearly someone more senior than these 2 junior police officers has authorised this. And it is not clear who from the complaint report, and it's not clear why. Because bear in mind, they have terrible problems. This police force has a very poor clear-up rate for burglaries. And in fact, we've got a great new police commissioner who's been elected, who's trying to get them to sort of focus on property crimes, who's conservative, incidentally. And one of the things they were saying on the website, now all sort of burglary victims, they're actually going to get a visit from police. Because in the past, if you're burgled, police might not even turn up. And it does put into context that, if people locally being burgled and the police aren't turning up, but the day I write an article naming the local police chief inspector, like the whole intervention team turns up at midnight, adverse inferences can be drawn from that. And what police have to understand is that the expression, the process is the punishment, works both ways. When I have done other charitable cases against police officers have had those cases hanging over them for years and eventually, had adverse outcomes. And if we can't resolve matters amicably, then very reluctantly, I am absolutely down for a years-long lawsuit, during which police officers will be named that obviously
would you say
have...
Would you say then that the Hertfordshire Police, I got that right, thank you for enunciating previously, would you say they're a little frosty towards you?
Well, they keep investigating me for things that I'm supposed to do. Like last year, I was dealing with a case, a woman had falsely accused a disabled man of rape. And I was going to run a story, but before I ran the story, I checked my facts. And because when I make a serious allegation, I say you've made up this rape, I sent a fact-checking letter, with my address on, my real name, it's not anonymous, saying, these are the allegations, and here's you actually texted this disabled man loads of times saying how much you wanted it and, come hither. And then the next day about how great it was. I mean, it was much more lurid than that, but I'll keep it sort of family-friendly. And so, before I take up this case and, write my article and help this guy sue you for libel for doing stuff publicly, I need to check my facts and, And then this person, of course, was quite worried, and they said that this fact-checking letter was harassment. And so police invited me to a voluntary interview. And I said, but I'm supposed to check my facts. And, it's a polite letter. It didn't have razor blades stapled to it. It was just a fact-checking letter. And they not objected to it. So I put in a complaint, and to be fair to them, the police in that case was slightly saner, did cancel the interview, and I didn't have to go in to be interviewed. And so I didn't name them, and I withdrew the complaint because one of them was a probationer. But what I'm getting is there's systemic weaknesses in leadership of police nationwide. And the Free Speech Union has done this huge study, which is on their website, about police not being trained in Britain's free speech laws. And it's a huge thing because it means it's an open goal if you want to sue them. Because the case law says police kind of have to document considering our free speech rights under the Human Rights Act, Article 10. And if they don't, it's quite likely you will succeed in your lawsuit. But none of the police are being trained in this. And so they don't know what they're doing. And, as I said in my complaint, they didn't even seem to realise that one of the laws had been repealed because they were constantly referring to the Malicious Communications Act, and the false communications provisions of that had been repealed in 2023, 2 years before, by Section 189 of the Online Safety Act. So what you have is local police who, and they're not all bad. I mean, one of them did a background check for the lawsuit because was considering making them a defendant. And he's very, very young, left school at 16, became a police officer, worked his way up to constable. I think he was PCSO first. And he'd gone back to, talk at his local school. And I just felt this young gentleman has had no help with this. He's had no training with this at all.
But when his boss, Mr. Frosty, says, hello, pop around and say hello to Sam and take a few reinforcements, he looks like he could be a dangerous person, which obviously you are. You look terrifying, especially in the blouse. I'm sorry about that. I didn't say that. Little Miss L did. Tell me this just quickly, because we are running out of time. If the police are not trained very well at all in what you can and can't say online, how do you think what could possibly go wrong with the Online Safety Act?
Well, in a nutshell,
Everything.
we now have, in the old days, you used to, if you make a factual error, you'd have a reader's editor or maybe a civil suit, but you deal with it like that. Now, instead of a reader's editor, you've got a SWAT team. That's it. If you have a false communications offence, and the only elements are you've said something untrue and you must believe it's untrue and it might hurt psychologically the audience. Anytime you make a mistake, you get someone's age wrong, SWAT team. And of course, that's probably not going to encourage people to speak their minds. I think that's going to have a chilling effect on free speech, Mike. Could
you imagine they'll throw you against the wall, they'll say, hello, you've said some hurty words. And but I think when deserves a lot longer than we have now. Your website is MatthewHopkinsNews.com.
Yes.
And also you're an advisor to Mohammed Butt, the CEO of video sharing platform 1VSP. Are you on socials in other areas, or is that the only way your legion of fans can actually find out more about you?
So I have a Twitter, MHN Witchfinder, and it's worth checking out 1VSP.com as well, because we're doing a documentary about this, but we've also got some live stream sporting events coming up, and we're going to have some celebrity boxing matches a little bit later in the year. I can't say any more than that. I've been sworn to secrecy, but the platform is going to have some very good content, and if you check out 1VSP, we'll be having some very good free content and some very good pay-per-view content, some of which will be very entertaining. Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, our pleasure, and I have a lot of time and admire Mohammed. I think he does a great job, and never one to be knocked down, is he? He pops up again and ready to fight the good fight again. Sam, always a pleasure. We'll do more of this. I think we have to talk about the Online Safety Act, and there are so many holes in that, and I think the day of free speech, and it's used flippantly these days, but in reality, free speech or your opinion, I think, or anybody's opinion, I think, is under this huge threat. Throw away that or control that, and you don't have a democracy. Sam Smith, UK blogger, thank you very much. Coming up next.